Welcome into the Illini Inquirer Podcast. Always pumped to get our guy, Mike LaTulip, former Illini, former Wright State guard, onto the podcast. And I want to do something different with Mike today. But first of all, I think we got to give you a welcome back to the Midwest. Is that right, Mike? With moving to the Indianapolis area, which is one of my favorite places to visit in the Big Ten, is whenever the Big Ten tournament is there, man.
No, I'm back, man. I'm back. It feels good to be around. It feels good to be able to pop over to Champaign and pop over to, to see my family, see my parents' family. It makes it a lot easier.
Well, Mike, let's hit on a few Illini things before we get a little more topical about the Big Ten. I want to get into the NBA draft with you as well, as we're just a week away from the NBA draft. I just want to get some of your opinions on that. I might ask you as a Bulls fan, what you think they could do this offseason. But let's start here. Ty Rodgers, man, with Team USA, is a starter on a team that has a couple future top 10 picks on it, in my opinion, with Cam Whitmore and Khalil Ware. And you saw some other really good players. Armstrong, who's going to Villanova too. What'd you think of Ty Rodgers, or just the thought of Ty Rodgers playing a meaningful role on a team that just won a gold medal?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that jumps out is a guy like him starting on that team. And it's never going to be about counting numbers with Ty Rodgers. It's always going to be about, the things that don't necessarily fill a stat sheet, although he does fill a stat sheet as well, which is great. But, the activity and he seems to always put his fingerprint on the game. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing you look at when you're even trying to extrapolate it to this year's Illinois team. I've said it, man. If you defend and if you're in the right position and you make the right plays, you put yourself in a really, really good position to steal minutes as a freshman. And I understand that the level of competition, that wasn't Iowa in the middle of February, right? It was there's a lower level of competition, but he did exactly what you'd like to see against that competition. And there's certain things where, a guy can put up 25 against a team like that. And then there's just watching the game and seeing, okay, that's a basketball player, right? Like that's a dude. And he's a guy that, in my opinion, can put himself in a position over the next couple of years to be an NBA prospect.
What do you think he needs to do to get to that level? For me, it's just shoot, right? Like everything else he does feels like a guy, Cam Whitmore is the difference is he can shoot, right? Like, and he's just a great offensive player. I mean, the NBA, we can talk about fans being nervous now of Ty Rodgers being a one and done. The NBA, you still got to shoot for the most part.
Yeah, and I think there's certain measurables that he has and what he does defensively and his feel for the game. Look at a guy like, I know he's a little bit taller, but Jeremy Sohan for Baylor this year, right? He shot 29% from three, but 6'8", mobile, could kind of guard down low, could step out and guard on the perimeter as well. And then just the ball skills that I think Ty Rodgers has. I think all of that is when you go through and you look at, hey, when I'm on the floor, and this goes for being at Illinois and beyond for his professional career, is the list of what I can't do longer than the list of what I can do. And if that's the case, you're not going to see many minutes. So I think the more you can flip that and say, hey, I'm giving you all the reasons why you can't take me off the floor. Those types of things, it's just, you can move him around in different spots. Watching him shoot, even just his free throws, it's not broken, right? Yeah. There's not just this, mechanical issue or, the way that he brings the ball up, the way he rotates it. He's one of the guys that I think, a lot of talk about Sky and Jaden Epps and, Ty Rodgers is a guy that, if you said, hey, he's going to be the first one to make his way to the league, I would not be shocked.
Sohan's a great example, right? 114th in the rankings going into his freshman year, averages 9, 6, and 2 for Baylor. Did shoot a decent amount of threes. I think that's going to be important for Ty at some point, just to show he can make some. All right, Mike, Jacob Grandison to Duke. What do you think of the fit? What do you think about this for Grandy?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this. I think typically we think of Duke as just they're going to go out and get the upper echelon, which they do in recruiting, but they've always kind of filled gaps. You saw Theo John this year. They typically will get up towards the top of those recruiting rankings. And then the way that they fill those gaps, it's what makes them a really good program. right? That year after year, they have all these guys that you wouldn't really think of as a Duke player, because when you think of Duke, you think of Jason Tatum, and you think of most recently, Luke Kennard, Paolo Banchero, but they've always filled those teams with different guys that just make a lot of sense. And I think you saw when Jacob Grandison went out for Illinois last year. He's a connector. He's a I hate using the phrase a glue guy because I think people beat that to death. But the connector aspect of, he's a really good passer, he's a really good shooter, he's smart, and those types of guys can play anywhere, and they're valuable. They're so much more valuable than some guys that maybe come out and have gaudy numbers that go into the portal. So I would expect him to play a decent amount for Duke because he's a guy that's low maintenance. You don't have to feature him to get something out of him. I think we saw that for a couple of years at Illinois, and it's what made him extremely valuable. So got to be happy for the kid. I think he's earned that type of opportunity for, winning a couple championships with Illinois. And I think that's another thing too. Hey, let's go get a championship guy. We're Duke, we're the brotherhood. Let's go get some guys that have won. So it's if you'd have told me that 2 years ago that Ryan Young and Jacob Grandison would be teaming up at Duke, I'd ask what you're having, I'd ask what you're on.
I like it for Duke because the times they've struggled, they don't have the veterans. They don't have just the solid guys. Or Kentucky was that way for certain years. And I think that's the adjustment. And Shire seems to be making it, on top of getting 3 of the top 4 prospects in the class of 2022. That's a pretty good thing for your program. Mike, before we dive into the rest of the Big Ten, I got to ask you, this is the time of year we talk to Brad Underwood. We hear all the offseason stuff. Whether it's Austin Hutcherson's the best athlete on the team, or, Omar Payne can shoot jumpers. Some of the stuff silly, other stuff, you hear about guys taking big steps forward, and it translates into the season. So as a guy who's been through these workouts, who's been through the offseason hype train, like, what do you try to listen to when you hear these coaches talk about it?
I've had moments, a guy that's my teammate in spring open gyms or spring workouts, like, man, this guy's going to be a guy next year. And the coaches see that too. And they really have no reason to think otherwise. It's just like we always talk about, when minutes get allocated and shots get allocated and the lights come on, different guys react in different ways. Summer workouts and summer practices and open gyms are a lot different than, a Monday up at Wisconsin. Right. So, I think they're just going off of what they can see. And I'm sure Dane Danger, they got a dose of that when he was going up against Kofi last year. And I think they really like what they see. And he seems to be a guy that is taking his nutrition seriously and shaving down some pounds. So all those things, you don't want to read into it too much, but the coaches have to talk about something, right? And I think if there's certain standouts that are in workouts, and you want to let that be known. But yeah, there's certain things that will happen in the middle of the season where you say, oh, wow, we didn't expect this guy to come on like he did. Or you can have a guy that maybe you're expecting a lot of that isn't adjusting, or, these freshmen, right? This is going to be the year you face the most adversity. So who deals with it the best is going to be who's probably on the floor the most.
All right, Mike, we're going to split this up into 2 different segments. We got Big Ten. I want to focus on the Big Ten with you. I got 4 questions surrounding the Big Ten and what's coming back. And it doesn't look like it's going to be that strong of a conference, at least at the top of it. But it should make for a pretty entertaining one, because I think it's a league with a lot of parity this year, with a lot of question marks this year. But then I want to dive into the NBA draft. So we'll shoot all of that at you here. But let's start in the Big Ten. And right now, Bart Torvik, one of the analytics sites, has his projections, his rolling projections, as he updates the numbers all the time. He has Indiana and Illinois 12th and 13th in the country, respectively. Those are the top 2 teams in his projections in the conference. I think the next teams are around 25 to 30. So he has them clearly on paper in his analytics as the top 2 teams. My question to you is, I think both those teams have question marks, right? If those are the Big Ten front runners, I think it's a weaker league, at least at the top. Which team, though, do you have more questions about, Indiana or Illinois?
I think it's not even close. I have more questions about Illinois. And part of that's just the makeup of this team. They lost a lot. right? And it's not, and it's more having questions about the actual team itself and how they're going to mesh. That's more of those are where most of my questions lie. We know there's good players, right? I don't have questions about Terrence Shannon. I don't have questions about Matthew Meyer or these guys that they've brought in. Like, they're good players. How are you going to make it work? Now, if you're Indiana, I have way less questions about you, but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean just because I have less questions means that you go ahead and find the nearest net and cut it down. I think for Indiana, you know what you're getting from TJD, right? The big questions are three things, right? Really four. What Xavier Johnson am I getting on a night-to-night basis? And if it's a good one, then they're going to be in a really good position to finish in that top four in the league. He's going to help propel that. Going off of Xavier Johnson, how can he become a playmaker, an even better playmaker, to set up easier outside looks for Indiana? This is a team that, going back to 2017, was the last time they shot over 33.3% from three. It's just, and it's hard. Teams shrink the floor on you, and it's really hard to generate easy baskets. That's why when you tune into an Indiana game, there's 30 seconds left and it's 58-56. They've done so well defensively to hold up and win games. But the third part of that is, can you continue to defend the way you've defended over the years? And then really the last part is, the question marks that you may have are surrounded by these really highly touted freshmen with Hutch, Fino, and Renew that are coming in that are, I think as you look, if you want to bring Indiana up a level from a 9-11 Big Ten team that they were last year, it's okay, we have those same pieces, and we're adding two potential game changers that are freshmen. So I don't necessarily understand the whole Big Ten runs through Bloomington. I think it kind of feels like it's just I guess resorting to a default of just, I know 91% of these guys or the scoring that they're bringing back, but it's 91% of 9 and 11. So what can we get? What can we really get? And then, like I said, with Illinois, less questions about the players, much more questions about how they make this fit. Who's going to step up where, who's going to lead. Those are really where the questions lie for me.
I look at it this way. I think Indiana has the higher floor, certainly, right? I mean, they're going to play defense. They're the number one defense in the Big Ten last year. Trace Jackson-Davis, Race Thompson, they got length on the perimeter. And as you said, Xavier Johnson, man, he was a roller coaster ride last year, but when he's good, he's one of the better guards returning in the Big Ten, which again says a lot about the Big Ten this year. But like, they have a decently high floor that they're going to make the tournament. Like, there's no doubt they're making the tournament. But I do have the issue of they're the no doubt top 10 team in the league or in the country, because we saw this team last year and they had a good week or two, right? And they just got blown out in the NCAA tournament by 30 points. I think Illinois has the higher ceiling once we get to tournament time. I just think they can play in so many different ways. I think Indiana is going to have to plot out games unless they just have Tamar Bates turn into a great 3-point shooter this year. Miller Kopp all of a sudden goes back to shooting 40% from three. You got to be able to make threes, and you got to be able to play make. And I just have huge questions about whether this team can shoot well enough. But I do know they'll play defense, especially under Mike Woodson. Mike Woodson's a really good defensive coach. Illinois, I think, is going to go through a lot more swings, ups and downs. But I think at times this year, there's going to be some people who look at Illinois and say, that's a dark horse Final Four team with the way they play, because they might blow out some team no one expects them to by 20 points. But then I think they're going to have like a game they shouldn't lose, like to Minnesota or something like that. And people are going to be like, man, this team can lose in the first round of the NCAA tournament. So I think Illinois is as deep and as talented as any team. But as you said, Mike, who's their number one guy? I know TJD is the number one guy. And is that good enough to win a Big Ten? I don't know, because I wish he was the number two on the team, but he is the him and Hunter Dickinson and Zach Eater, the best players returning. I'd feel more comfortable with Hunter as my number one guy, especially offensively. But like Illinois, all these guys have been threes or fours or have not played at the college level before. So I think both have huge questions. But if I'm gambling on who goes farther in the tournament, I'd probably go Illinois. If I'm gambling who's more likely to win 13, 14 Big Ten games? It might be Indiana, but I just got to know if they shoot. I don't know if they're going to be able to shoot.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I think anytime, as somebody that graduated from Illinois, covers a little bit of Illinois, it's like anytime you say something about Indiana, like I'm saying this, apart from Illinois. I can make a comment on Indiana without me saying, like, if I say Indiana, if I don't think they're going to win the league, that's not me saying that I think it's going to be Illinois. Right. I just think, when you look historically, because Jeremy, you and I were texting that one night, and I was like, I need to put down everything I'm doing and go and see who the last team that finished below 500 in the Big Ten to turn around and win the Big Ten was. If you didn't see the tweet that I put out a couple weeks ago, 1991. It's been over 30 years since a team's done that. So it's not just, Illinois, I'm Illinois and this is Indiana. It's historic, like history's not on their side for this. Ironically, it was Indiana, like I mentioned, but Calbert Cheaney, they had a pretty good crop of NBA guys in that team as well. So
here's what we're doing, Mike, because the teams we're going to talk about here in a second, because they didn't make the moves necessary this offseason, we have to find a Big Ten favorite. And I don't think Illinois or Indiana should be Big Ten favorites in any year, given the question marks we're talking about. But they've had the best off seasons. Indiana's returning a lot. They have one of the best players in the country. They have young talent coming in. Illinois had an unbelievable roster reset, but these teams shouldn't be. They should be the teams we're talking about as like dark horses to win the Big Ten. Or, hey, look out for Indiana or Illinois. Don't pick Michigan State quite yet, but those other teams didn't do enough.
Well, I think it's a product of how much star power was in the league last year. Look at all the guys you lose. You lose Kofi Cockburn and Johnny Davis and Jaden Ivey and EJ Liddell, and you lose all these guys. So the second you lose those guys, you just basically take all those other teams. You take those same teams out of your mind because of the guys they lost. And we've seen, Io leaves, right? And Illinois still, ends up winning a regular season share. I understand Kofi came back, so it's a little bit different, but we'll get into these other teams. And the point that I want to make now, I'll save for these teams that we're about to talk about.
Yeah, because we didn't even mention the Caleb Houston Diabate. Like if one of those guys comes back, I'm probably touting Michigan right now, but those guys didn't come back. All right, let's talk about this. Michigan State, Purdue, Michigan. I feel like all these teams, Mike, were one addition or one player returning coming back of being my Big Ten favorite. So they are next in the Bart Torvik projections of being 3 through 5 in his projections right now. I think all these teams have a chance to win the league, but for you, because maybe they're one player or two away, which team do you think had the most underwhelming or kind of disappointing offseason?
I'll give you a phrase or a word for each of them. I'll take it a step further. Right. Let's start with Michigan. I can't say Michigan had an underwhelming offseason just because you send a few guys to the NBA. It's like, if anything, that's a feather in your cap. As much as it may, stink for that next year, it's still, if they both get drafted, that's another guy that's probably going up, two guys that are going up in the Michigan practice facility somewhere. So with Michigan, I would phrase them as the biggest gut punch of the offseason. And you lose Diabate, you lose Houston. And another question that we'll talk about down the line, Frankie Collins would have been my surefire pick for a guy that was primed to break out. He leaves, right? And even Brandon Johns, who played a lot of really good minutes for that team, ends up going to VCU. And look, I think if Diabate and Houston came back, for sure, if Frankie Collins was still there as well, but even if Diabate and Houston came back, I think that would be my favorite.
Yes.
That team would be my favorite, just because I think question marks, assuming a sophomore step up from those two, which I would absolutely expect. And I really grew to like that pairing of Diabate and Dickinson. The way Dickinson was starting to step out, and I thought the way they ran some of that high-low stuff was potent, but you pick up Llewellyn.
Didn't you think Houston was in line to be like a lottery leap kind of guy? Like his length, his shooting ability. I just thought he kind of learned how to play college basketball last year. He's probably going to be a back end of the first round or early second rounder anyway, so good for him. But I felt like he and Christie were kind of guys who could have gone a leap, but I liked what I saw at Houston more than Christie most of the time.
Yeah, and I think you look at this Michigan team, you know what you're getting from Dickinson, just like you know what you're getting from TJD. Now it's just who else is going? What type of Jalen Llewellyn are we going to get? He's not playing in the Ivy League anymore. Coming over, playing in the Big Ten, a little bit more physical, obviously. And then who's that next guy to step up? I'm hearing a lot of Kobe Buffkin talk, but I'm not sure there's a ton of evidence. Could it happen? Sure. But I'm not sure there's a ton of evidence to suggest that he's going to take this monstrous leap. As a guy that didn't shoot it particularly well last year, can he take strides in that area? Will that make him a little bit more potent? Sure. But like I said,
that's like counting on RJ Melendez to be your second or third leading scorer, right?
Exactly.
Like when Illinois was in that area, it was like, it could be a rough year,
yeah,
right? Because you just don't know yet.
Yeah. And look, Hunter's going to give you a chance to win a lot of games. Right. So, you're going to be in a position there because he's just going to command a certain amount of attention. He's going to get doubles from night to night. And if you can surround that, and you got Jet Jackson coming in too, who's another really solid freshman. So, it's really interesting. Each of these teams. I'll move on to Purdue here.
Can I make one more point?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to make one more point about Hunter.
Yeah,
I love him for the Big Ten. I love a good heel, and he plays it so well. But he could be in for like a maybe not quite Garza stat season, but given the questions around him, that guy could average like 24 and 10 every night. Kofi put up huge numbers last year. Hunter can shoot threes. Like I think he's going to be in such for high usage. They need him to score that much with all these other question marks around him. I think he's my Big Ten player of the year favorite, not TJD. Yeah. If Indiana wins the league and TJD's close to Hunter, maybe he wins, but Hunter's going to be my preseason pick for player of the
year. It would be mine as well. I think his statistical ceiling is reached. How often can he get to the line? Because Garza was a guy that just got fouled nonstop and drawed nonstop fouls. So how often he can get to the line will determine that statistical ceiling. But I wouldn't be, you're right. I wouldn't be surprised to see him be a 2021 and 10, 11 type of guy. Pretty similar to, I guess, what Kofi did this year. I know Kofi definitely had more of a physical advantage night in and night out, but Kofi didn't have an outside jumper. So if he can, even if Hunter Dickinson shoots between 33 and 37% from three, which would be really solid, that's going to, get him into that next rung as well.
Yeah, average 18.6 points per game, 8.6 rebounds. So he was pretty high last year. I think he takes another leap. All right. So you use that. I thought that's a really fair way to say Michigan because, hey, their guys did take leaps, right? They're going to the pros. The question is they just weren't able to end the transfers. Yeah. Maybe one of them was due to academics and Illinois gets the benefit of that, but they haven't been able to land those guys yet. I would expect them to add one, whether it's Amani Bates, Joey Baker, we'll see who it is. But Purdue and Michigan State, how would you describe those offseason?
Yeah, my word for Purdue's offseason was just, it's just, I think you're in the running for Nigel Pack. You're in the running at some point for Tyrese Hunter as well. And quite frankly, if I'm being dead honest, Purdue is one of those guys, maybe not as much Nigel Pack, but if they get a guy like Tyrese Hunter or they get one of these big guards in the portal, they're right there too, because I think their front court's better than any front court in the Big Ten. I think people are really forgetting. Everybody knows Edey's coming back, but Gillis is back. First is back. They have these really solid front court pieces. And the next guy that I'll mention is the guy that redshirted last year that they were really high on. Trey Kaufman-Renn is a guy that was sitting out. And if you need some front court guys, Purdue's got you. But it's just,
can they pull a trade?
Yeah,
can they trade Ethan Morton for some backup point guard somewhere?
Yeah, and a future 3-star to be named later. I just think you look at this team and the amount of offense that you lose between Travion Williams and Jaden Ivey, Sasha Stefanovic, Eric Hunter, Isaiah Thompson. It's a lot. that you're losing. And I look, and it's just, who is going to be the point guard for this team? Like, is it Braden Smith? Are you going to just hand the ball to Fletcher Lawyer and be like, hey,
I think so.
I think that's going to, and if that's the case, if there's anything that's going to prevent Purdue from being a Big Ten champion or being in the top 3, top 4 in the Big Ten, it's going to be the guard play. So, I look at those guys, and man, you expect First to take another step. I really, really like Mason Gillis. I think he's probably one of the more underrated players in the entire league. But yeah, I think Painter just runs a certain system. They're going to throw it into Edey. Edey's going to have an advantage most nights. And but I really want to see how it was really easy last year. They could just split right down the middle, basically 2020 with Williams and Edey. So how they divvy up those front court minutes is going to be interesting. They certainly have the bodies to do it.
I don't want to look too much into it. Jaden Ivey's going to be a top 5 pick. And he did that while, developing at Purdue. I think Painter's one of the best coaches in the country in development. But the style of play, did it turn off some teams? Because Jaden Ivey wasn't the initiator of that offense most of the time, when I thought he should have been in the Big Ten Player of the Year, but he wasn't, because he just didn't have a lot of usage. All right, how about Michigan State, man? This might be the most perplexing of all of these off seasons.
There's your underwhelming. It's Michigan State. I think, they simply didn't have enough last year, and really could have patched up some holes and addressed some needs in the portal, particularly on the interior. You lose Marble and you lose Bingham, and then on the wing you lose Gabe Brown. So plenty of guys in the portal to go get. It didn't even have to be this crazy impact type of guy. Bingham's a good player, long, altered a lot of shots. There's guys like that out there. Marble had an impact as well. There's guys like that out there. And I don't know if it's a stubbornness or just a refusal to just, I don't want to say get with the times, but we've heard through press conferences and little news clippings. I'm not sure how big of a fan of NIL and the portal itself Tom Izzo is. Right. Now, I say that, but this is a guy that's won a hell of a lot in this league. So I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. But at the same time, this is going to be a test run, right? You have all these teams that are trying to load up through the portal and through NIL, and you're Michigan State. You have one of the better brands in all of college basketball. And I don't know if that's kind of losing its luster a little bit. And it's maybe not as heavily sought after as a place as it maybe was in the 2000s to early 2010s. But look, you're not that far away removed from a Final Four in 2019. And I think him being relatively sedentary in the portal and in with NIL makes me think that he at least feels good about who he has coming back. You have Malik Hall, you have Hauser, you have you have Tyson Walker, you have AJ Hoggard, and that's not a bad core.
Jaden Akins could be really good.
Jaden Akins can take that next step. So, you have guys that that's the assumption that I want to make. Not just Izzo's throwing in the towel. It's he must like what he has. And sometimes less is more, when you're trying to go win a league, right? I mean, how many of us had Wisconsin winning it last year? I know that they're not going to have a Johnny Davis, but you can win this league in more than one way. So remains to be seen, but geez, really, really perplexing when you look at what they could have done in the portal. And really the only guy that I saw them even going after or targeting was Micah Parrish, who was 12 a game in Oakland, and he ended up going to San Diego State. So yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. They must think they're in a good position to try to win a title.
Which, Mike, I like the foundation of that. Like, I like their 7 guys that I think they have. I don't know if they have a guy. Can it be Akins? Can Hoggard shoot? I like a lot of things Hoggard does. He's tough. Malik Hall, I don't know if he'll ever be a star, but he's a really good player. I want on my team. Hauser's skilled. It just felt like, give me one more piece. whether it's a guy to replace Gabe Brown or another big to pair with Sissoko and Jackson Kohler, the freshman they're really high on. Trey Howman is a really good prospect as a point guard. It just felt like this was the team that was screaming one more guy and Jeremy will pick you to be the Big Ten favorite. Like if they had one really good wing coming in, like if they had a Terrence Shannon level guy coming in, I would probably pick them to win the league because I really like their depth. And in this league, without, the elite talent, we think, I would have liked this team. I do want to give Tom Izzo the benefit of the doubt. That's starting to wear when you hear kind of, how he's talking about 3 open scholarships. Nobody wants to compete. Listen, I think guys are just trying to look out for themselves, looking for the best spot, and you just got to adapt to it. I think Brad has done that. I'm not going to make everybody happy, but I have to adapt into adding talent, and that I'm not probably going to have guys here 4 years. That's not going to happen. So I have to adapt and be okay with that I might not have as many Draymond Greens in my life as I'd had before. And he's got to be okay with that. And it just seems like with all these 6th, 7th place finishes that are kind of accruing, the more that happens, the more I wonder how many years does Tom Izzo have left? And is it good for Michigan State? But I still think this team is going to be good. I just think it had a potential to be great.
Agreed. And I think the other point that I'll make as well is in I guess I don't want to say in Tom Izzo's defense, because everything you just said about the way that he's handled this is spot on. It's true. But if there was any year to stay put, it's probably this year because of how open the league is. So if he was going to do this last year with the amount of star power that was in this league, and if 2020, 2021 or 21, 22 was this upcoming year, it would be probably even more perplexing. But
on your side though, as well, he did finish 7th last year. He finished 8th year before. He won 3 straight Big Ten titles before that. So I hate doing that, but like I'd be concerned if I'm a Michigan State fan. I'd be angry because I felt like I could have a great team and not a good team. But it's also Tom Izzo. So
yeah, and look, you make a good point, because although we can get wrapped up in some recency bias at times, the press clippings and what he said is what he said. So if it was just a couple middle of the pack finishes and he hasn't been saying anything about NIL and he hasn't been saying anything about the transfer portal, then maybe you just chalk it up to, hey, he's got it figured out. It's Tom Izzo. But coupling those press clippings and him being relatively a statue in the portal and NIL.
Negligent is negligent away, because it's just, that's how I would kind of describe it. Because it just feels like, man, this was the makings of a potentially great team, but I just think it's gonna be good. And they're a team that's going to be, competing at the top of the Big Ten, but I just thought they could have been the front runner. All right, Mike, the next 5 teams in Bart Torvik's rankings: Iowa, Maryland, Rutgers, Ohio State, Wisconsin. I think all 5 of these teams have a chance to exceed that. But somebody's not going to, right? Somebody's got to finish 8th, 9th, and 10th in the league. But which of those 5 teams would you buy as the team most likely to finish top 4 next season?
It's the first one you mentioned. It's Iowa. And the reason for it, you lose a top 5 pick, or what is shaping up to be a top 5 pick, depending on what the Kings it's really depending on what the Kings do. But you return his brother, who's probably going to be a first-round pick next year. And you get another year of Patrick McCaffrey. You get another year of Tony Perkins, who in my mind, I think is a guy that can be in position for, 3rd team honorable mention. I think he's that type of athlete. I think he's that type of bulldog. And look, I think Fran McCaffrey deserves a ton of credit. Yes. I think we have it in our mind that he just coaches and recruits a certain way, but we've seen him adapt year to year to how he's changed his scheme. It's very reminiscent of how Brad Underwood's done it.
2 years ago, I saw during the COVID year, I saw him and Fran, because usually coaches don't come out before games. Like Izzo will and sit by himself. Like most coaches just kind of sit in the locker room. At least Brad does. Those guys came out and talked for like 30 minutes. I was like, these guys are best friends. But the way they have approached this is very similar. Like, I think they've adapted. I just think Brad's getting a higher level of talent. I say that in Keegan Murray's going to go top 5. Chris Murray is going to go really high. He had the 2-time Big Ten Player of the Year. But you know what I mean? I think across the roster, Brad is recruiting a little bit higher level of talent, but I think both of those guys have made similar adjustments to the era and style of play that they look up more like Big 12 teams. And you see what the Big 12 is doing in the NCAA tournament.
And they both developed, right? When you look at Underwood and McCaffrey, when Luka Garza came in, and really when Keegan Murray came in too, those weren't guys you just pointed at in their first couple games of their college career saying, oh yeah, no, that's a future pro. Maybe Keegan Murray just because he has the measurables and really good athlete and has that sweet stroke. But man, I think the way they've really molded their system around their personnel, there's stubbornness in college basketball with coaches where it's, I've been running the system for 20, 25 years. This is how we're going to run it. Doesn't matter who we bring in, you know, get in where you fit in. And they've just done such a good job of adapting to that. And I think it's a big reason why they haven't, you know, over the last few years, they haven't bottomed out. Like they're continuing to bring in guys and, you know, up their level of play. And I think that, you know, you lose Bohannon, and I know he threw in a lot of threes this year and really over the course of his career, but he hurt you in some areas defensively. And now I think you can get an even steadier dose. Joe Toussaint's a big loss. If you wanted to script a portal fit, Joe Toussaint to West Virginia was probably my number one. But look, I trust. A lot of it comes down to these coaches. You know, what do you lose and how do you deal with it? And the coaches that are really, really good are able to still find a way to compete. And that's Fran.
And I just love the way the roster fits. I think Tony Perkins could be in for a huge year.
Yep.
Stanford and McCaffrey, both long shooters. Chris Murray, athletic, do everything guy. You know, Rabracha, he's okay, right?
Serviceable. Right.
Yeah, he's okay. Like that's the weak point of the starting 5 for me, but he's serviceable in this Big Ten. But they just have talent and they have pieces that fit and play a different style. And I think their style of play was so different than everybody last year that it really, really hurt teams that couldn't keep up with them. All right, one more on the Big Ten. We saw so many sophomore breakouts. We're not going to see the level we saw last year with Murray, Ivy, and Davis. I think everybody saw Ivy coming. I don't know, you know, Murray and Davis to that level that they're lottery picks, but which players are you sold are going to go from role player to stars next season in the Big Ten?
I don't think you're going to see as drastic of a leap as we saw last year from a few guys. Now, I think there's guys that, particularly a few freshmen and a couple guys have spent a couple years in the league, and I'll go through a couple of them that I think can, at least with higher usage or more opportunity, can take that next step. I think the first guy I look at is Chucky Hepburn. And the reason for it is just his frame and his proclivity to not shy away from the moment. And he reminds me a lot, you know, not necessarily, I hate to bunch him in with like Jordan Taylor and some of these other
phenomenal player, by the way. Jordan Taylor was so good.
Yeah. Some of these really, really good Wisconsin guards, but he has that same type of build and toughness, and he's heady. And I know he shot about 35% from 3 last year, but you know, if he makes another jump there and can turn into a little bit more of a playmaker, you know, this is a guy that can be right there to be all league as well, in my opinion. And then, you know, another guy that I think has a ton of potential. We just talked about Michigan State. Like, I think Malik Hall has so much potential. How good of an athlete he is. About 2 attempts from 3 a game last year, 42%. You know, it looks good. I know he missed a few free throws at Illinois to close out the game there, but I think the way that team's constructed, again, more opportunity with a couple of those guys leaving. I think AJ Hoggard's a good enough playmaker. Tyson Walker has his moments of being a solid playmaker. To be able to get him a little bit more involved, because he's that guy. If Michigan State's going to hit their ceiling, Malik Hall's the guy I'm looking at. It's like, hey, no, you were 8.9 a game last year. We're going to need you to be 11 or 12, right? We're going to need you to be 12 or 13. I think that may be best case scenario, but I think he's capable of doing it. And then the third guy that I'll mention, just because he's more than anybody. his success is going to be predicated on what his guards do. But Cliff Amuri, I just love his game. He knows exactly who he is. He wreaks havoc defensively. He rebounds at a high level, 8 a game. I think he can even bring that up a tad this year. And but he was almost 11, 12, and 8 last year, and I think doesn't really get enough credit for how good of a player he is. We always want to see just the the gaudy numbers and the crazy highlights, and he has a few of those with the dunks and the blocks that he has. But he's just kind of workmanlike. He goes in, he does his job, and he's a big reason why Rutgers has had some success over the last couple of years, because he bothers the Trace Jackson Davis, the Kofis, the Hunter Dickinson. He bothers those guys. So, he's probably the third guy that I'm looking at. It may not be some crazy jump, but you may be looking at him as a guy that's like, yeah, he could be a second, third all-team or all-league guy.
Yeah, and we're talking NBA draft here in a second. He's a guy that I think could find a role at the NBA for sure. All right, Mike, let's talk about that NBA draft. We're about a week away from the NBA draft as the finals wrap up here. And what a finals it's been with the Warriors and Celtics going back to back. But this is a fun year where we actually get to debate the number one pick in the draft. There's not a lot of years that it's this big of a debate. But I think there's 3 candidates. Some people would even throw Jaden Ivey into that picture, given the guard play is so important. But who would you take number 1 in the draft? Jabari Smith out of Auburn, Chet Holmgren out of Gonzaga, or Paolo Banchero out of Duke?
Yeah, I want to say it stinks having the 4th pick because there's a clear top 3, but I think there really is a clear top 4, and I'll get into that in a second. But a lot of times when you're drafting number 1, right? I'm looking at the profile. A lot of these teams that are making it to the finals, these teams that are having success in the playoffs, it's big wings. It's big wings that can shoot it and defend, and that's Jabari Smith. So if I had the number 1 pick and I was the Orlando Magic, the thought process of my guards with Suggs and Cole Anthony and Markelle Fultz, I don't have to rely on Jabari Smith to handle the load, the ball handling load, because that's not where he excels right now. You put him next to Franz Wagner, and that's a hell of a wing duo. That's a really, really good wing duo. And, Mo Bamba's probably going to move on, so you're going to need to address some needs from the big spot. I know if there's one thing I know the Orlando Magic love, it's long bigs. So I wouldn't even rule out them going after Chet. But I just think Jabari Smith, it's a safe pick. You certainly want to nail in it. If you're more of a gambler, I'd say go for Chet. But I just love what he offers, what Jabari offers defensively, and what he offers as a shooter. And a lot of times you look at one season, right? He shot almost 43 or 44% from 3 this year. Is it an aberration? Is he really that type of shooter? And really all the historical data on him, even going back to high school, he's always been doing this. So, yes. I think there's a lot of value there. And I think just pairing him with those guys, I think it's a pretty seamless fit.
Listen, Chet did well for himself going to Gonzaga, and maybe he helped himself by not playing against SEC big guys every time. I wish I would have seen him at a spot where he's the number 1 guy, right? Like Kevin Durant, everything ran through him. So you knew how he could score at that level. Chet's a phenomenal shooter. I have a hard time passing on him, Mike, because I know he's going to be one of the best defenders in the NBA. He's going to impact defensively so much. And that reminds me of Evan Mobley, who I loved last year. I probably would have taken him number 2, but the only reason I would have taken Cade number 1, or even can agree with Jalen Green, is who can I run offense through? I mean, that's the most important thing in the NBA is you see once it comes playoff time, who can I run offense through? Who do other teams have a hard time stopping? So if I'm Houston and I have Jalen Green, or if I were Detroit and I have Cade Cunningham, I might go more with a guy like Chet, who I know can be an elite complement guy. But if I still need the go-to offensive, it's hard to pass on a Jabari Smith. And I like Paolo a lot. Is a guy who can get 20 a game in the NBA. Can he impact a lot of other things? I think Jabari Smith can still do a lot of other things for me, but I'd have a hard time passing on Chet just because I know during a regular season how much his defense is going to matter, but come playoff time, Mike, like your number one guy, you got to be able to run offense through him. While I think Chet can shoot all those things, I don't know if he's proven yet whether he can be that offensive focal point, even though I think he'll be really good.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And honestly, that second pick, whoever falls to OKC is going to be in a really good position with Josh Giddey and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I look at Holmgren and Jabari Smith particularly for those two spots. And those are guys that you're surrounded by that are going to elevate your level of play. And I think Chet may be in position to fall to, be the second pick to OKC. And look, I picture, look at how Robert Williams is utilized. I get their different offensive talents, but the way that Ime Udoka moves Williams around to let him be a roamer a little bit so that he's not the guy that's on ball having to block shots. It's just, hey, camping outside of the lane until someone can drive and you're coming across from the weak side. I think that's the type of defensive profile that Chet can have. I think there's some elements to where you can switch a little bit with him. But I think the thing with Chet, where if you're going to spend a first overall draft pick on him, a lot of that comes down to like, who is the kid? And everything that I've heard out of Gonzaga is that he just loves hoops, man. He loves hoops. He loves to play. He works his butt off. And obviously a lot of these guys
got that dog in him too, right?
Yeah. And a lot of these guys at the top do. And I know you said you wanted to see him as maybe the number one guy. It's funny when people pointing at his stats and saying, oh, but he only put up, 13, 14 a game in the WCC. Yeah, but they're blowing out Pepperdine by 50 and he's sitting for the last 8 minutes. So I do think if he went somewhere else and if he went to, for example, like a blue blood, that he'd still be, he'd probably still have around the same type of numbers. The only difference is, for a guy like Chet, I don't think he's the type of guy that you can say, hey, do we really know he can do it against competition? He did his whole entire AAU circuit, his whole entire high school career. His high school team that his senior year went and played literally anybody in the country that was anybody.
Yeah.
And they're on ESPN like twice a week. And he showed, I remember sitting, I don't know why, maybe it's I watch enough college and watch enough NBA. I rarely sit there and watch high school and say, wow, this guy blows me away. It's just like a weird, I don't know. It's like you see enough basketball to where it just looks a little bit lower level. Chet was the one guy I yelled down for my older brother. I said, hey, you got to get up here, man. You got to watch this. I mean, he's 7'1". He's coming down. He's shooting hezzy threes. He's dunking on guys. He's blocking shots into the fourth row. You can work with that. There's a lot of talk about his frame and he hunches a little bit. And it's just, I don't know. I know.
Ball, man. Like, yeah. I get it. I get the question marks about him, but there's some unicorns. There's some freaks out there. I worry about his body breaking down. Like, that's what I'd be more concerned about, his injuries.
Yeah. And he held up really well this year at Gonzaga too. So
and it's just the thing maybe our minds got to get over, right? But like Chris Stapps, Ralph Sampson, some of these guys who are just freaks, you wonder if they can hold up. Then you got a guy like Giannis who's the Iron Man, right? So
yeah. And then you don't want Chet to turn it into this generational talent, and you were sitting there at the number one pick.
Exactly.
With Jabari Smith. So that's where the dilemma comes in for the Magic is,
do I take Karl Anthony Towns or do I take this guy who could be one of the best players in the NBA? Like,
and I know it was a different time, but it's almost, and I know this guy dominated his 1 year of college basketball, and I know hindsight's 2020, but Odin over Durant, like it's one of those things. And I don't know how red flagged Odin was for some of the physical stuff coming in, but man, I'm sure that's one that the Blazers would want to have back. But it's going to be interesting. This is going to be one of the more fun drafts over the years. I know last year it was pretty clear cut, who was going to go number one. And then even in 2020, it felt like there was a kind of a clear top three between Edwards, Wiseman, and Ball. So, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. I think this draft has a lot of potential to even picks 10 through 18. You're going to sit there and say, oh, wow. Yeah, this guy, or you're looking, because I mean, you got to realize too, it's not just about striking gold as a top three pick. You can strike gold in the late lottery. You can strike gold. I mean, look at all these guys. Look at Tyler Hero, Devin Booker. Giannis was the 15th pick. There are plenty of guys. Bam Adebayo was outside the top 10 as well. You can strike gold. It's not just about those top 5 picks. And this is a deep draft where you look at a Mathurin, you look at Shaden Sharp, whatever the heck he is. I don't think anybody knows. Mark Williams,
Dyson Daniels,
and all these guys, man. It's a really intriguing draft, and I think it's one that we're going to have a lot of fun with 5-10 years from now, looking back and saying, oh wow, this guy went here and projected to be this. It's going to be a blast.
I don't see the top 3 teams moving from their picks, but I think it could be fun to see if there's some finagling to see who prefers who after that. So I want to ask you this: Keegan Murray and Jaden Ivey kind of always projected in those 4 or 5 spots by most of these mockers. So which Big Ten prospect do you think will be the best player in the NBA, whether it's those 2 guys or a guy you think should be talked about more?
It's not even close to me. It's Jaden Ivey. If you're the Kings, you cannot mess this up, man. You can't mess this up. Now, as I say that, I would love, and when I say love, I mean I would love to see Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey in the backcourt together. Because Cade's a guy that can play off the ball. Jaden can play on and off the ball. He did both at Purdue. And look, with Jaden Ivey, I think the space, I think the ball screens, I think that is going to benefit him so much. I know the comp is John Morant, but the way Purdue, you mentioned it earlier in the podcast, the way Purdue runs their offense, it's off the ball movement, it's misdirection, it's feed the post. You saw the second half against Illinois when Painter finally just said, screw it, ball screens with Jaden Ivey. And it's like, we are at this guy's mercy.
Can't do anything.
Yeah. So, it's going to be a lot of drop coverage in the NBA. He's got a solid float game. He can attack down the rim. He's a confrontational driver. Now, he spends so much time on the floor. It scares the hell out of me. It's the same thing as Ja Morant, where, they hit the ground like 8 times a game. So he needs to shore that up, because different from Ja, I think he's an even stronger. Ja's probably even a more vertical athlete than Jaden Ivey, which is
crazy,
saying a lot. But I still think Jaden's probably a more powerful athlete.
Yes.
So he's got to be a little more. He's going to get himself hurt if he continues to fall down after every time that he drives. But look, the Pistons would be fun, man. And I've also heard some rumblings that the Knicks may want to make a move there. I think they want to go after Jaden as well. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see them trade up or maybe try to go up and snag that 4th pick from the Kings and add something to the package. So now I think Keegan Murray, I wouldn't be surprised to see Keegan Murray playing 27 minutes a game in the conference finals in the next 7 years. He's just that type of guy where he can switch. He's interchangeable. He's a great athlete. He's a good defender. He can shoot it. He's not a net negative offensively. We know that. So there's a lot of intrigue there. But look, it's Jaden Ivey. And if you're one of these teams, if you're the Kings, I mentioned that if Keegan Murray's taken by the Kings, maybe he won't be playing in the conference finals in the next 7 years, but they got to focus on making the playoffs first, but it's not close for me.
Yeah. Keegan Murray to me is like a guy that I can see as like the 3rd, 4th, 5th option on a really good team.
Yeah.
Jaden Ivey, I think, could be a perennial all-star.
He's the guy. And that's the way I thought about it, right? When you pose the question, it's who has the best chance to be an all-star? And as much as Keegan Murray may play 15 years in the league, I could see him, being in a position where he's like I guess like a step above and a better athlete than like a Robert Covington, right? Yeah. Where like he can shoot from the outside, or maybe even like a Tobias Harris, maybe one of those. And that's no slight. Tobias Harris is slated to make $41 million in 2 years. So, so if Keegan Murray ends up parlaying his way into that, then he'll be in good shape. But there's obviously a few other Big Ten guys, and we'll get into that. One of those I'll talk about here shortly. But yeah, Jaden Ivey's the guy that I'd look at. I wouldn't be surprised to see him be an all-star in the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. So I got my guy, but who's the prospect to go outside the lottery that you love?
I got 2. And I think if you're a Bulls fan looking at that 18th pick, and I don't know what they'll do. We'll get into that in probably the next question. What they do with that 18th pick? Do they draft? Do they flip it? I know Vooch is on expiring. It's two guys for me. Jalen Williams out of Santa Clara. I really, really like him. I think if you're the Bulls and you end up with the 18th pick and Jalen Williams is still available, this is 6'5" with a 7'3" wingspan. 39% from three this year. So 6'5", 6'6". Rebounded pretty well for his size and solid defender. Graded out incredibly well, 92nd percentile on synergy offensively, and he can still take another step defensively. I think when you look at Jay Nivey, I'll mention that too. That's the next step for him. Very similar to Io, right? Io, there were certain things. It was falling asleep on back cuts. It was standing straight up and resting because there's so much demanded of you and expected of you offensively. Where I think Jalen Williams is a guy like. Go and watch some of his highlights, or if you have a synergy account, go watch him, man. He's impressive. The way he was really the point guard for Santa Clara and was able to make a lot of things happen. So I think he's a guy I wouldn't be surprised to see his stock rise before next Thursday. And my second guy, this is going to be music to your ears, Jeremy. It's EJ Liddell.
Yes.
I've seen too much.
I've seen too much of him.
Yeah.
It's like that's a perfect NBA forward. Like he is. I don't think he's ever going to be superstar, but like he just screams Taj Gibson to better, like a plus Taj Gibson potentially to me, and I love that.
And look at the way the NBA is moving.
Now,
look at the way that these guys interchangeable. Look at the success that Xavier Tillman's had. Being able to come in, another Big Ten guy that's been able to come in and carve out a role for a really good playoff team this year. I could see EJ Liddell, and that's the thing when you sit in that, in that part of the draft where you're in that kind of 17 to 22 range, you can find yourself in your rookie year playing some heavy playoff minutes depending on the team that drafts you. So EJ Liddell, I think he took that next step as a rim protector. That's not to say that you just want to roll him out there as a small ball five, but I think there's certain lineups that maybe you can work through the season and see if it works. I think he's capable of it. I think he moves his feet well enough. Now, he didn't have crazy good defensive numbers in terms of isolation and ball screen stuff. So I think that's another step that he needs to take, but serviceable as a knockdown shooter, as a catch and shoot guy. We've seen him kind of make a killing in the mid-range as well. So I think there's going to be a team that drafts him in that, in that 17 to 24 range. It's going to feel like, hey, mid-season next year, they got a lot of value out of him.
Yeah, I think he'd be perfect for a playoff team. Like if you're looking for a team, or you're not going for the roll the dice, let's see if we can get a superstar.
Great kid too.
Yes. I think he's got all the intangibles. And I think he's got all the skills you're looking for there. Let's go with this before we get to the Bulls. Next week, Kofi Cockburn will be blank.
Kofi Cockburn, if he was in, if I was in a front office, I would have Kofi Cockburn on a two-way contract next week. And the reason for it, two ways, as much as you could say, hey, maybe I don't want to spend a two-way on a big, I think you got to at least see, right, with him. And it's
somebody,
the best of
one of the 30 teams should.
Yeah, it's a low risk. You're able to kind of audition him throughout the season, see if it works, while still being able to develop him in the G League and have him getting starter minutes and starter reps. And then just saying, hey, we got a 5-day road trip here. Let's call him up, see what you got here in the middle of December, see what you got here in the middle of January. And it's not like you're having to spend a second round pick on him. And I don't know, could he get drafted in the last couple picks? Maybe. But I also think if you're Kofi Cockburn, instead of going maybe 55th, I don't know which two picks are 53 and 58, I think, are maybe forfeited, or I don't know what it is. But if you go 56 or wait 4 picks, don't get drafted, and pick your destination for maybe a team that believes in you or believes it sees in you, hey, you're a guy that maybe we want to put on a two-way and give some opportunity to, there's some value in that. Now, I don't know, easier said than done. If somebody told you were going to hear your name on draft night and get drafted, maybe you just say, hey, screw it, draft me. And again, it's another draft pick for the University of Illinois as well. So that's another feather in their cap. But look, I think there's too much there, too much production in college for you to not, to at least not put him on a two-way and just kind of see what you can get.
And I feel like at that level, we're talking about investment. He's probably worth it given his work ethic. Everything we hear, the work ethic is really, really good. Wants to be great. I think, the relationship with Io certainly can help there. So I get the question marks about him as a player, but I also think he does things really well, right? Like he's a physically dominant player who could rebound. And I get the questions defensively, but he also can do some things defensively around the rim that can help you too. So, I think he'll be on a two-way contract as well. I don't know why. I feel like the Lakers need bodies. Let's go Kofi.
How about that? There's some big markets that University of Illinois
That's right.
guys are heading to. We got Malcolm and Io in Chicago, and we got, if you want to count Kendrick in that too, you would have Kendrick and Kofi.
That's right.
In LA. So that'd be intriguing. But ball screen defense, ball screens, Kofi. How potent can you be? And this goes back to what I said at the beginning of the podcast: is the list of reasons to take you off the floor longer than the list of reasons to keep you on the floor. How can you shave that down? How can you turn the tide there? And I think the more he can do that, the more opportunities he'll find himself in wearing an NBA jersey.
All right, Mike. This is the season of speculation, and it's fun to talk about trade rumors, all that. The Bulls took a huge step forward to just being respectable, right? It was a fun season until probably February, right? But they had the makings of a solid core that should make the playoffs. I'm a Vooch fan, given how hard he plays. Obviously he's got limitations defensively. He didn't shoot all that well from three, but I'm a fan of his, but he is on an expiring deal. DeMar's got 2 years left on his deal and is in his 30s. Zach LaVine will be max. They'll keep him. He's going to stay with the Bulls. But what do you do if you're Arturas Karnisovas?
It's tough, man. I think sometimes you fall for, hey, just spend, even if you go into the luxury tax. And I look at the Warriors payroll this year, right? The Warriors payroll this year is about 180 million, but with the accelerators, they're paying close to probably 380, 400. But the difference between spending to just find your way so far into the luxury tax to sell out to try to contend is that sometimes it seems that have done that are the ones that already know that they're contenders and they are keeping their core intact. And that's why they go into the luxury so far. There's plenty of teams over the years, whether you want to just look at the Lakers this past year, the Nets, the Clippers, they spend so far into the luxury tax. And if you are not in the playoffs getting some sort of a return, because that's the thought process for Joe Lacob with the Warriors, right? Joe Lacob with the Warriors is saying, okay, yeah, I have a $380 million tax bill, but I know that if this team presently constructed can play 25 playoff games, 13 of which are at home, each one of those playoff games generating somewhere between $8 to $15 million, then we can at least get some sort of return on it. You run such a big risk.
Plus you're just, this is made up money, but the value of your franchise, the longer you win, the more championships you win, just skyrocket.
Exactly. And so it's an investment for a lot of these owners and the front office, the owners. If you look at the Bulls, man, you don't want to spend your way so far into luxury tax that you're handcuffed. So I think if you sign, all right, let's say you sign LaVine for at least $30 million. He's probably going to go more than that. As presently constructed right now, the Bulls are about right at 100. The cap's going to be at 122 next year. You spend your way up to 135 with LaVine, you're not done. You still have to fill in these different fringe pieces with, whoever it is, Derek Jones Jr., Matt Thomas, Troy Brown Jr., their deals are up too. So you still have to fill those holes and you're going to keep working your way in there. So I don't know. I think there's sign and trade potential with Zach LaVine. I think you can actually get a solid return on it. Who that is, you look at how unhappy is Anthony Davis with the Lakers. But then again, do you want to take his contract on when he's been made of glass, for his entire career? You don't want that to be a sunken cost as well. And then also too, I mean, you just mentioned he hasn't picked up a basketball in 2 months. So I'm not sure that's the most enticing thing in the world either. But you mentioned Vooch on an expiring. There's a lot of Rudy Gobert talk. And my personal opinion is I don't want to stare at $46 million in 25-26 with a guy that in some cases in the playoffs couldn't really have him on the floor against certain lineups. If you're spending $46 million on a guy, to me, if you want to work your way into actual contention, you're going to need to go and make a hell of a splash. You're going to need to flip Zach LaVine and a couple other guys and some picks to go get like Damian Lillard out of Portland. Yeah. You're going to have to go make some sort of splash like that. But I think if you're this front office, you can't fall into just going head over heels or falling so far into the luxury tax that now you're maybe a first round exit. Now, you're not getting any return on it. So can you be crafty enough to put together a roster, almost follow the template of like the Miami Heat, where it's like, hey, we may not win a title, but this is a conference finals type team. We've done enough work around the fringes to not handcuff ourselves. If you look at Gobert, here's the other two options I'd even explore outside of Gobert. I'd go get DeAndre Ayton.
That's it. That's the guy.
Like, go get DeAndre Ayton.
He's the guy because he's young. He's less expensive. You can build around him, Lonzo, LaVine once DeMar is gone. And I think he's an upgrade over Vooch, no doubt. And a guy that in the playoffs, I don't have to take off the floor. Like Gobert intrigues me for my short-term want to get better, and he would make them better unquestionably. But better to what end? For a second round loss? Like probably, right? There's a ceiling. That's DeAndre Ayton's a guy I can build a core around with him, Lonzo, and LaVine.
There's a ceiling with Rudy Gobert. And if Rudy Gobert, if he is listening to this podcast, I'm not sure how big of an Illini Inquirer fan he is, but if you're listening to this podcast, I get it, man. The perimeter defense of the Utah Jazz in the playoffs was absolutely atrocious and put him in such a tough spot to where I honestly, I couldn't blame him. He was guarding like three different guys at times. So I think that at least the Bulls defense, if you get Lonzo back healthy, Caruso in those spots, and then also, if LaVine and DeRozan could be even just plus defenders.
Io's plus defender.
Io's a plus defender. I think you can work your way around the fringes to build. We get title in our head so much, but in your mind, you should just be thinking, can I get 8 home playoff games?
Yes.
Can we at least make some sort of return on the money that we're spending? Because if we're just going to go all in for a guy like Anthony Davis and he plays half the season and you're in the play-in, then what are we doing? So,
Mike, you make a great point. Us fans, understandably, I think it's all the legacy talk we do. We get so caught up in if our team's not winning a title, it doesn't matter. I would have loved to have rooted for Jimmy Butler in the last 5-6 years. Like, he doesn't have a title. Yeah. I would have loved as a fan to root for Jimmy Butler. I loved rooting for Joakim Noah and Derrick Rose. Like, those teams did not win a title. Derrick, if he wouldn't have been healthy, I still don't know if they win a title if he's healthy. But those runs, those teams were so fun and entertaining, and that's part of this. Like that's part of the NBA, is just to be fun and entertaining. Yes, at some point you want to win a title. That is the goal. You also just want to win games and be relevant. And the Bulls being relevant for most of this year was a lot of fun. I'd like that to go a little deeper. But I know until we get a Luka Doncic or a Ja Morant, like it's going to be very hard. It's very hard to do it with that especially when you look in the East and you got Giannis and what the Celtics have, Joel Embiid, what Miami's built. But Miami is the model. Miami, Toronto, they're kind of the models of what the Bulls are trying to be, which is relevant enough for long enough that you're respected and that one guy eventually wants to come play for you and you win a title.
And some sort of identity too. Yeah. I think that's the next step. You look at Miami. The Miami's identity is that Heat culture, right? And that's really hard to replicate. But look at the Raptors. The Raptors is just, hey, we're going to be freakishly long, and we're gonna present some problems. So I think, I don't know. I mean, I think if you can take, and I'm not even sure the Raptors would do this, but I love the idea of getting even better defensively. I know they have good wing defenders, but finding a guy that's that 3-and-D guy that's very dependable. Like, I look at a situation where if Kobe White behind maybe Miles Turner has been the longest standing trade chip, I think, in the NBA. But if you can package a way to go get like an OG Anunoby, go get, a 24-year-old, pretty reasonable contract. I think he's going to be 17 to 19 million over the next couple of years.
You know who you're talking about right now? It's Pat Williams. Like, Pat Williams is the key to all of this.
Yes.
He really is.
He is.
I don't think they're going to trade him. I don't
think they are either. But like, the last point that I'll make about the Bulls, look at the two teams that are in the NBA Finals right now. It's the Warriors and the Celtics. Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Kevon Looney. I'm mentioning a lot of guys that were drafted by the Golden State Warriors. Let me flip to the other side, right? Robert Williams, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Grant Williams. All these are homegrown guys. So as much as we want to scramble around and try to find a contender, do not take your eyes off the draft. If you got that 18th pick and a couple good trade chips here, on Vooch on expiring, if you think there's a guy in the top 7 that you think can be a difference maker and help this team, because you got to think the next couple of years, that's a cheap contract. So it's a $5 million contract, $6 million contract for these guys that are going in the top 10. You can continue to build around the fringes that way. Whereas I'm not sure you move these parts around. You move Vooch and Kobe White for another guy. Like, I don't know, like, pick a guy. And it's like, I think Ayton, we mentioned Ayton. I think Ayton would be the play here. Like, if you're going to say Vooch, Kobe White, I mean, is Vooch, Kobe White in the 18th pick? Is that too much? And do the Suns say yes to that?
The Suns ownership might say yes to it, but I don't think it helps the Suns.
I don't think it does. I don't think it does either, unless they identify somebody in that 18 range that they say, okay, well,
yeah, I think you'd have to give up Pat Williams for him, which I'd be fine with for DeAndre Ayton most likely. But yeah, I think the way we look at this, I think a lot of Bulls fans will look at it like, okay, who can we put with DeMar, right? Zach, Vooch, or whoever. Vooch may be out, but DeMar, he's awesome. It's awesome what he's turned into here with the Bulls. I'm still looking at, okay, these are the guys, Vooch and DeMar, who helped the Bulls back to respectability. The core is Zach LaVine, Lonzo Ball, Pat Williams, Ayo Dosunmu, and whoever they take at 18. Like, I can throw Caruso in there too. That's the core, right? Like, that's who you got to build around for that real championship window. Because I don't think a championship window is there with DeRozan and Vooch.
No, it's not. And it's the classic, what got you there won't get you there.
Yeah.
I think that's, well, I think what you do realize too.
Which poor DeMar, it's the same thing in Toronto.
Right, exactly. And honestly, San Antonio too, to a degree. But I think when you look at this team and you look at this fan base, man, like this was a Chicago Bulls fan base that was just itching to have something to cheer about. And I think that in itself is a win. And if you're ownership, if you're the front office, building off of that, because you do have a product, right? You have a product that people want to go see, which cannot be said for some other NBA organizations, and how some of those fan bases react. So, man, I'll go back to it. Can we construct a team that can play 8-ish home games in the playoffs? Like, that's the goal. Get a return and just continue to reevaluate through the draft. And look, look at how Jason Tatum ended up with the Celtics, right? There's all these picks. Build that draft capital. If you can, some teams are able to do both. The Celtics were able to do both. When they traded away Garnett and Pierce and all these guys to the Nets to get that haul back for draft picks, it wasn't until, whatever that was, 3-4 years later, where that turned into a Jason Tatum. So I know DeRozan, Vucevic, and LaVine aren't Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and and whoever else they package in that trade. But look, you have an opportunity to be competitive. Maybe you're a 4, 5, 6, 7 seed while also building draft capital to be able to play with that. Because the Celtics weren't getting a top 3 pick. they just weren't getting a top 3 pick unless they move some things around. And, you know, it turned out to be Jason Tatum. And I know he's not having the best NBA finals, but he's in the NBA finals.
Pretty dang good.
So, you know, Jaylen Brown, same type of thing, right? That's another top 3 pick that you got just based off of moving around and having draft capital.
Mike, I don't want to let you go, but this is going to be my last question for you because we're an hour. I took an hour of your time. Which player on the Illini right now is the best long-term NBA prospect?
The fact it's a hard question is a good thing.
Right.
I think that the two that you look at are the 2 guys you just picked up in the portal, to be honest. I'd probably take Terrence Shannon over Matthew Meyer just because he's kind of a classic 3-and-D guy. He's 38% 3-point shooter last year, and I think he can even eclipse that this year. I think he's that good of a shooter. I think he's if he can stay healthy, he's gonna be able to show a lot of things, being able to switch, and he held up well when he got switched into the post. And I think he can rebound at an even higher level and show some things in that area. But Matthew Meyer too is just a guy that you don't see a lot of guys with that type of skill set. That's why these Big 12 guys, you see them going to the NBA draft and, playing in the NBA finals and playing in the NBA playoffs. Those are the type of guys you just picked up this year. Now, what I think that next group of guys that I think have NBA potential, Ty Rodgers is right there. What version of Sky Clark we're going to get? I really personally, I don't have crazy expectations for Sky Clark because I'm not sure that that's fair. Coming off of the ACL, and I think it's, he'll ease into things and kind of hit his stride. It may not be right in November, but he's the type of guy, he works his butt off. He'll work his way in. And, and then RJ Melendez is a guy that we've talked about before too, has the tools, has the length, has the athleticism. It's just that next step, right? Do all these guys want to go do those hard things that can take them to that next level? I think
a guy with maybe as high of a ceiling as any in terms of draft pick is Coleman Hawkins.
Yeah.
If it all clicks up here and he brings it defensively and he can shoot 38% from 3, that is a guy the NBA wants. You can be a top-notch role player. And I think he's got a great opportunity to do that. He doesn't have to be the guy to be the most valuable player on this team. He doesn't have to be the go-to offensive player, but I think he can be as valuable as anybody on this team.
And I think too, going off of Coleman Hawkins, we always get infatuated with, okay, I need to have this type of role, put up this type of numbers in order to be an NBA draft pick or in order to put myself in a position. Look, I've seen Coleman Hawkins on NBA draft boards, and it's based off of what he is doing, which is just, hey, you're active, you're a plus defender for your size, you have length, the stroke looks good. That itself, you don't have to put up gaudy numbers to fit that mold of the NBA because it works the opposite way too. You can put up gaudy numbers and still not be a good fit, and that's what Kofi Cockburn's going through right now.
I use this reference way too much, but he just reminds me physically so much and skill-wise of this guy. DJ Wilson was the 17th pick of the 2017 NBA draft. He was 4th on his team in scoring at Michigan. He's 4th. Find Derek Walton, Zach Irvin, Mo Wagner. That's the kind of role I think he can play. But DJ was a good shooter, broad energy, solid rebounder, and impacted defensively. I think if Coleman buys into that, man, I think he could be as high on NBA draft boards as anybody next year.
And I know it's a little bit different. This is a different type of position that I'm mentioning, but I always like to I had to pull it up because I always reference him when I'm talking about, hey, we need to put up these type of numbers and do this. If you just fit the mold and you show that, hey, you can work your butt off, you're adaptable, you can find your place in that league. Garrett Temple, okay? Garrett Temple. Let me walk you through Garrett Temple's LSU stats from 05 to 09, okay? 5 a game, 8 a game, 6 a game, 7 a game. Career 37% shooter, career 27% three-point shooter. Playing in the NBA because he fits the mold, right? He was a 2-time all defensive guy in the SEC. And I think if you're Coleman Hawkins too, he's a type of guy this year that I think can be in that all defense type of category. There's no reason.
His number one goal.
That should be his goal. And if he can do that, he's gonna up his stock even more and put himself in a position potentially in 2023 to to either hear his name called or even go and test the waters and get more feedback. That's all on the table for Coleman Hawkins. It's just whether or not he wants to apply that and believe that in himself, because it's right there for him.
Well, Mike LaTulip, man, this was fun. I thought it was going to be fun. We're excited to do this. Talking hoops for about an hour and a half with you, from everything of Indiana versus Illinois to NBA draft prospects. We ended with Garrett Temple references. I think that's a pretty good basketball conversation. Can't thank you enough, man. And welcome back to the Midwest.
Happy to be here, man. As always, you and I were texting yesterday. We said, oh yeah, no, this is going to be a blast. And it was. So I appreciate you for that, man. It's middle of June, still a lot of hoops to talk about, and even more in a couple months here when we, when this team starts playing some games.
Yeah, exciting stuff to talk about too, rather than hopeful for no reason, right? Like that's the nice thing. Michael LaTulip, thanks, man.
Take care, man.